Each year on the 14th of October, the members of the International Organization for Standardization, the International Electro-Technical Commission, and the International Communication Union celebrates World Standards Day, which is a means of paying tribute to the collaborative efforts of the thousands of experts worldwide who develop the voluntary technical agreements that are published as international standards. With Kenya being a major exporter of horticultural produce to Europe, these products have two sets of standards that they need to meet before they find a space on the European shelves.
Kenya Standard 1758 comes in two parts. Part 1 covers floriculture, which is production of both summer and greenhouse flowers, and Part 2, which covers heavily on production of fruits and vegetables together with herbs and spices for the market.
According to Simon Modu, the EU ambassador to Kenya, standards are a cornerstone of any business within the European Union, and that only goods that meet the laid down standards will be allowed to trade in markets within the European Union.
Within the context of the European Union, standards are very, very important to keep goods flowing and trade moving. We are the world's largest common market, and as such, standards have traditionally played a very important role within the European Union, because it's meant if you're buying your product in France and it's produced anywhere else in the European Union, you can be certain that it meets the domestic standards and is safe.
Many standards are imposed to protect the public against food safety risks, but there are other standards, including private ones, that deal with issues such as food quality, environment and social factors, and sustainable development.
Equally, I would say our public in Europe have very high expectations that when they're consuming a product or using a product, that their own health and safety is protected. We have limited appetite for running risks with our lives when you consume food, and we want to be certain as well that the toys, for example, that we produce for our children are safe. Now, what this has meant is that often standards have been used to provide that safety to our citizens, be it in what we call phytosanitary standards, the quality of the food produce we eat and consume.
As we celebrate this World Standard Day, it is for all of us to realize that without standards, there is no chance for improvement. In fact, this was a saying that was stated by a Japanese engineer that is the pioneer of the Toyota production system, where the emphasis is on quality improvement. And that is why we say with standards, we are able to automate, we are able to trade, we are able to minimize movement, because we can now trade through e-commerce. We have various platforms now that we can be able to trade globally. That reduces in itself emissions, because you don't have to travel now to order some product, because you can send through electronic means. And then this conserves our environment. So standards are very important. It is not possible for you to order something that is not compatible with what you are working with.
Public standards are set by governments and their agencies and are subject to the international trade rules under the World Trade Organization, of which Kenya is a member, while private standards are by definition privately imposed by businesses and non-governmental organizations such as Global Gap, and are not subject to any international regulations.
Standards can either be voluntary or they can be mandatory. Voluntary standards means that the compliance is not required, that the goods may be found at the market that don't meet this standard. The only thing is that your buyer may choose to buy them or not, depending on which standard they want. But in the case of compulsory standards, these are required by government, and so you cannot place goods on the market or trade in them without having this standard first being met. We also have, therefore, in this jargon of standards, that what we call a mandatory or compulsory standard is given a name technical regulation. So when you hear the name technical regulation, It means that these are standards enforced by governments as tools for regulations, and they are technical regulations, and requirements for this are compulsory. We also have private voluntary standards. Private voluntary standards are private schemes developed by private non-governmental bodies, but which influence business. Some of the private voluntary standards, especially in the food sector, will be Global Gap, for example. Global Gap is a pre-farm gate standard. Before, that's at the farm level, where if you produce goods in accordance with the Global Gap, then the farm produce is likely to be acceptable in many of the markets that recognize the standard. There are other standards that go, private voluntary standards that will go to the market end, to the industrial market end, like BRC, British Consortium. We have got other international standards, but they are not compulsory, like the ISO standards, and these are called them voluntary standards. And it's important to get this distinction because not all of these standards are set by governments. If there's any standard that is demanded or set and enforced by government, the only option is to comply with it. Because if you don't comply, it means then that those goods will not be put at the marketplace. For other standards which are not enforced by government, there may be other objectives, like we may want to ensure that we produce in a more effective manner. Standards increase efficiency in production because then you are able to maintain only specific stocks that meet the requirements at any one time, and you can order many of the stocks later on according to the specifications, and they can be delivered just on time.
There has been an increase in incidences of food contamination and scares in the recent past, both locally and globally. This has raised food safety concerns and awareness. Hence the value of customized hazard analysis critical control point plans. Horticultural produce has been singled out to be the most prone to pesticides residue, heavy metal, and microbial contamination. Kenya has put stringent measures in complying with international standards and market requirements, but a lot remains to be done for the domestic market.
I see no reason why Kenyan consumers shouldn't be able to benefit from exactly the same safety and knowledge that when they consume a product, they use maize, they eat fruit, vegetables, that their health and safety is protected in exactly the same way as the European Union. But secondly, from a trading perspective, I'm really proud that the European Union is the major destination for Kenyan exports in the agricultural and horticultural sectors to the European Union. Something like 80% of your agricultural exports go to the European Union. On a daily basis, we have flights from Nairobi to Schiphol bringing the cut flowers to Amsterdam, which acts as a clearinghouse for the rest of the European Union. There's 500,000 jobs depend upon that. Now, of course, when Kenya is exporting a product to the European Union, we want to make sure that that product meets our standards. It's a prerequisite for its export. So this is why also in a Kenyan context, we've been doing an awful lot of work with Kenya to try and help exporters raise their own standards, both for domestic production and consumption, but also for their export.
In Kenya, food safety control system is multi-sectorial in approach. The legal and regulatory framework governing produce, food safety and quality standards for both domestic and export markets is contained in local statutes, subsidiary legislation, global good agricultural practices, and to a lesser degree, international protocols.
The standards are developed by a team of experts, and we pay tribute to these experts because they dedicate a lot of time to develop these standards. Standards are developed by, like I've said, through consensus, and they are voluntary in nature. It is the standards that are developed that are basis for development of regulations that are now used by other competent enforcement agencies.
According to players in the horticultural production, market demands on particular standard specification arising out of increased consumer awareness has always played a role in determining quality for producers targeting those markets.
Traditionally, these standards having started in the 90s, there was lack of awareness with the requirements, and so as FPIC we have helped to create awareness about the standards. Some of the challenges include lack of capacity for training and lack of sufficient finances to do the actual implementation of the requirements of the standard. So at FPIC we have tried over the last couple of years to facilitate our members with the access to finances, linking them to the various financial providers, and getting also the synergy that we are able to get from the various programs being implemented in Kenya. And we have developed, together with other people, some national interpretation and guidelines. Now FPIC hosts the National Technical Working Group that develops guidelines for Global Gap. So last year, we led a team of experts that developed the Global Gap GRASP, which is a social and ethical standard. And that is now being implemented by our members. And so they are able to access the market because of that brand.
In terms of trade, standards should be seen as the language of doing business. For you to carry out international business or transactions, you need to communicate to your buyer who is far away, or you are the one who is selling to your supplier who is far away from you, and therefore the specifications for the products must clearly be agreed and outlined in the contracts or in the supply arrangements. Now, in trade, therefore, traders are very hesitant to begin to supply to a country which has different standards from the ones that they have used to produce in their home country. The reason is, when they get to the border, before these products cross to the other country where they are exporting to, they will be intercepted if they don't meet the standards for that country. In this manner, therefore, standards can also become a barrier to trade. Although they were supposed to be facilitating trade in terms of being the language of doing business between the buyer and the seller, now if they differ between two countries, it means that they cannot trade, because when they are checked at the border, they will not be meeting that important country's standards.
Currently, local growers implement a number of international standards. However, complying with these standards is both tedious and costly. Presently, associations like the Kenya Flower Council and the Fresh Produce Export Association of Kenya have taken steps to help their members to meet these standards. And with this help, Kenya has seen the number of certified growers increase, leading to a reduction on the percent of number of interception registered for Kenyan horticultural exports.
Our members are heavily involved in the development and implementation of these standards, because the standards then assure the consumers of our produce of quality, food safety, ethical, environmental and social practices that are involved within these standards. And currently we are training 40 farmer groups on Global Gap standard. We are also training 11 pack houses on British Retail Consortium and the Food Safety Certification Standard 22,000. And we will be supporting this year up to February next year a number of our members and their suppliers to renew the certificates that would have been expired. And this is partly because of the support that we have received from Trademark East Africa. We also provide guidance on the type of standards that are required. for our members to fulfill the market requirements.
To ensure that we are able to access a bigger market, the Kenyan exporters and growers of export products must ensure that they comply to standards that are required by buyers. These standards include Global Gap, they include KS 1758, they include ISO standards, and they include social and environmental standards. So the project aims to support the SMEs and farmer groups to comply by ensuring that they provide capacity and technical assistance for trainings for this standard.
To help small-scale farmers produce and export horticultural produce, especially fruit, vegetable, herbs and nuts, to the European Union, the EU is currently funding a project dubbed the Market Access Upgrade Program Markup that is being implemented by UNIDO in partnership with the government and the private sector, with the aim to support improved standards and increase exports of agribusiness and horticultural products to the European markets.
The project aims to address some of the weaknesses that have been found out through research in terms of increasing exports out of Kenya. There are mainly two. One is inability to comply to market access requirements and regulations, and the other one is to increase institutional capacity for those institutions that are involved in conformity checks and compliance to market requirements. So UNIDO project aims to get involved in trying to support the institutional capacity for the institutions that are involved, and this is done through capacity building for the various activities that they do in diagnostic testing and calibration to ensure that their process is efficient and they are able to do their work more efficiently. And the second one is to enable small-scale producers, SMEs and other actors involved in the agribusiness export value chain to be able to get a bigger market access.
On the other hand, Global Gap is a voluntary standard without legal force. It is a standard which is very significant to two markets which are important destinations for Kenyan produce, the UK and the Netherlands. It is a pre-farm gate standard applying to the way products are planted, grown and harvested. Therefore, its requirements have an immediate and specific impact on farming practices and farmers. The standards operate through process control that are verified through record keeping and third-party audit. This can be challenging for small-scale farmers.
The usefulness of a standard is how you demonstrate that you comply with it. And for a standard, once you agree that you are going to use a standard, whether it's voluntary standard or compulsory as required by government, then you have to follow it. So for the region, as the regions or as business opens up post-COVID, standards will play a major role. Now, the new norm is to ensure safety, safe supply of goods across the whole supply chain. And this will mean that standards will define the activities or protocols done at the different stages of the production and supply of goods to the market. And it means that standards will then have to be observed at each stage or developed where they don't exist to guide the private sector to carry out their business effectively. So we should see standards generally as tools for success, tools of trade, tools, preconditions, and what can help you provide evidence to a third party or to a customer that you're doing business the right way. The assurance to the buyers that your product is the better one or meets the requirement can only be done through standards themselves.
Realizing profound implications for farming practices, including those of small-scale farmers, of the requirements for farmers supplying leading European supermarkets to comply with these standards, there was a considerable effort in Kenya directed to facilitating farmers' compliance and certification. In addition to various international bodies, aid donors working in Kenya also supported efforts to enable farmers to meet the requirements of the Eurogap, now Global Gap standard.
We have one program called Markup, a flagship program implemented by the United Nations, working hand in hand with us and the Kenyan export producers, looking to give exporters training on how to meet the standards, very technical advice on what are the kind of perhaps changes they may need to make to their production, but also advice on what are, for example, the safe kind of pesticides you can use if you're growing crops, which would still mean that the crops are safe for export. And we've obviously also put a huge emphasis in the agricultural sector, given, as I said a moment ago, that something like 80% of the exports of Kenya in the agricultural sector go to the European Union. So one of the little programs we're funding together with Denmark in what we call a Team Europe initiative. This is where we bring together the funding of the European Union's budget and that of the member states together, is called Agrify, where we've been funding here 13 kind of testing but also support centres at the county level, working with exporters to give them on-the-hands training. And I think in total something like 13,000 people will directly benefit from support. And again, what we're also trying to do here is support the Kenyan small-scale producers to rise up the value chain of production. So much more of the value of agricultural production is left in the European Union. And with the Kenya Climate Centre for Innovation and Change, we're doing this fantastic programme at the moment, Agribiz, which is also giving a priority to women agricultural entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs, and through a series of calls for proposals we'll be supporting something like 18,000 businesses to rise up the value chain in agriculture.
Markup project is also going to support implementation for ISO 22000 standard, which is also called FSSC, Food Safety Security Certification. The main aim for this standard is to ensure that we can continuously produce safe and quality foods, that when it's consumed it doesn't cause any illness or any ill health, and we can assure our buyers that we are supplying safe food. We are also going to support the institutions that are involved in the compliance and conformity of these standards by ensuring that the project will support capacity building for them to implement ISO certification, ISO 17025 certification.
This new environment poses new challenges for both farmers, processors and exporters downstream in the value chain. Securing and demonstrating food safety has become an issue for the whole of the food value chain and for the regulatory processes that contribute to its governance, both public and private. The new approach not only implies that process controls over how activities are carried out, rather than reliance on inspection and control of the products resulting from the activity, operates at different points along the value chain, but also that food safety depends upon the integrity of standards being maintained as products move between companies and countries in their journey from farm to fork.
The project aims to increase efficiency of the institutions that are involved in the conformity checks to ensure that our export produce complies to market standards and regulations required. Secondly, to support small-scale producers and SMEs that are involved in the export industry and actors in the export value chain to ensure that they comply to market access regulation and standards. This process of support will ensure that the project comes in and timely supports activities that will ensure that Kenya can get a bigger market access for its products. Among the value chains that have been selected, the project works in 12 counties within Kenya, which were selected during the project inception stage. And the project is a 4-year project running from February 2019 all the way to 2022. And what the project aims to do is to ensure that within the period, the project execution period, that all the activities of the project that agreed will be implemented?
Markup is a project, as you know, supported by the EU for East African countries, 5 of them out of the 6, and it focuses on food supply chains. It's more on horticulture and the crop sectors, so to say. And markup for Kenya is implemented by UNIDO, and focusing on horticulture, focusing on nuts, herbs and spices. For us as a trademark, we cover the whole range of those commodities, the whole range of those products, and we focus on standards and SPS measures.
According to these experts, rather than seeing collective private standards aimed at securing food safety and the drive of the standard environment, they should be seen as a response to the changing food safety environment. On one hand, food business operators are expected to secure food safety and to provide safeguards, such as traceability. On the other hand, food safety has to be secured in the face of an expanding range of food safety concerns and the increasing globalization of food supply systems. In spite of the increasing fragmentation of food value chains across companies and across countries, there are strong expectations from government and consumers that the level of control and the level of knowledge about how food is grown, handled and processed on multiple points on the chain should be maintained or increased.
FPIC is one of the beneficiary partners for the markup project, and we work closely with the UNIDO team and also the ITC team in implementation of the various project activities within the country. Through the markup projects, we are keen to create awareness on food safety, and we are also keen to ensure that we provide training to our members, especially on the local standard, Kenya Standard 1758, and Global Gap, British State Consortium, and FSSC 22000, which is a food safety standard. So we will be looking forward to UNIDO partnering with us to provide these trainings, capacity building and support to our members, because that will assure that there is increased production and enhanced market access for the various products coming out of Kenya.
For the remaining part of the year, 2020, we are likely to see an increase in the volumes that we shall be shipping to Europe and other parts of the world. And this is because it is towards winter in Europe, and traditionally Kenya has been a major supplier to European markets, especially during winter season. So with the opening of the international space and Kenya gaining new markets, we are likely to produce more, we are likely to ship more to those destinations. And probably by the time the year ends, Kenya is likely to have made about 230 billion from horticulture.
I would want to encourage everyone to embrace standards so that we can trade all of us globally.
As standards continue to evolve, further challenges for export production cannot be ruled out. The big question now will be, what should government and donors do in response to new standards challenges when they arise? Philip Keitany for The Next Frontier.